I'm going to have to read a little bit, my notes on the first, because there's a lot of stats, and I want to get them right. After that, it'll be free flow, pretty much. But I want to start with a few facts because I found bees to be such a fascinating critter. And the thing is, the more I have spent time around them, the more I want to spend time around them. And then I go to these conferences, which I'm going to show you, and supposing, and most of the presenters are PhD research scientists, and every time I learn things that just blow me away in terms of how sophisticated they are, and here's some facts. Honeybees, everyone knows they're crucial as pollinators, but they pollinate about 75% of the agricultural crops in this country. Honeybees do. A single honeybee produces about a 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in its entire lifetime. They communicate with each other by performing elaborate waggle dances, and that's something I want to talk a little bit more about. It'll blow you away when you find out how they are able to communicate within a hive.
Are you going to demonstrate?
Yeah. Well, do the waggle. Remember all the dances? Anyway, they have 5 eyes, 3 small eyes on the top of their head, and 2 large compound eyes on the sides of their head. They have very, very good vision, and they maintain a constant temperature in their hives by working together to fan themselves in a cluster around the hive, inside the hive. A queen bee is the one who lives the oldest. She lives for up to 5 years, typically 2 to 3 years lifespan. Worker bees typically live only 4 to 6 weeks. The worker bees are all females. The drones are males.
Do the drones stay in the nest?
The drones get kicked out as it gets towards the fall. The worker bees, the females had enough of them because they don't pull their weight. They kind of kick them out, honestly. And the drone's only job is to fertilize the queen. And the drones fly around and they look for a virgin queen or another queen. And the queen actually stacks up the sperm inside her body so that she can continue to fertilize up to 2,000 to 3,000 eggs a day during the most prolific, period of laying eggs. So bees are the only insect that produce food that is consumed by humans. Honeybees can recognize human faces.
What?
Honeybees recognize and they can prove that. I'm sorry, Debbie? What I found interesting is that when I installed my nukes in my hive, they tend to be agitated and somewhat aggressive at the beginning. So you got to wear your bee suit. You need to use smoke. You have to. But as time goes on, as I go into the hive, and they get used to my smell and what I look like, I end up most of the time not wearing anything, and I'm not even. I'll wear a veil on my head, pretty much, and that's about it. If I'm taking the cap off but when I'm adding syrup, like right now, the baby bees, I'm young bees in the nukes, I'm feeding them all syrup. I go in through the back of the hive and I take the lid off and the inner cover, and I pour the syrup in, and they just kind of watch me because they're used to it, and I think they do get to know you. They play a critical role in biodiversity, and one environmentalist said, if you want to save the bees, a lot of people talk about saving the bees, then care about planting flowers and other pollinator plants anywhere and everywhere. A group of scientists declared the bee the most important living being on the planet as well.
How do honeybees and native bees interact?
Next week.
Okay.
They actually get along very well inside in the same environment. One of the studies that not studies, but it was a study, but it was a presentation at a conference that these scientists had determined that honeybees can prioritize nectar sources they have a vision because of their receptors in their eyes can see many more phases of light spectrum, and honeybees can actually determine which flowers and plants have the most nectar. Regular bees, native bees, only go from plant to plant to plant, but they cannot differentiate. That's why honeybees over time have become more efficient and through evolution.
Will they ever share a nest?
Yeah, they won't share a nest. The nests for regular bees tend to be fairly small. Honeybees are social creatures. They're very social. There's between 10,000 in a nucleus that you will start out with in your hive. You'll either start out with what's called a package, which has like 3,000 bees, or a nucleus of bees, which is about 10,000 bees that are on 5 frames that have everything for a small colony or small family to start with. So then you insert those frames in the middle, and then you populate them with empty frames on the outside of the brood box. I'm going to get into that in a minute, but the queen I mentioned could lay between 1,000 and 3,000 eggs per day. Commercial beekeepers tend to replace the queen in the second year because they become less efficient as time goes on. And I've heard some commercial beekeepers, one of the things you do on an inspection is you look at how effective the laying pattern is on the eggs, and if there's a lot of gaps in it, then it tends to mean the queen is kind of running out of life expectancy in the production, so the commercial guys will tend to replace them.
So how does the hive react when a commercial beekeeper moves the hive to, like how they'll move it to an orchard?
Yeah, they get used to it. I went to one apiary in Massachusetts when I went to the EAS conference last summer, and they're going to end up with about 5,000 colonies, but the majority of them, they put them on trucks and they take them to California for the almonds, they take them to Florida for orchards, they take them to Georgia for peaches and other fruits and vegetables and things like that, and they lease them. And they typically get about $175 per colony per lease, and one colony of bees can pollinate about 2 acres of land. So you can kind of tell how many acres of land somebody has on their farm if they tell you how many colony bees they use, if they're all being used for pollination of fruits and vegetables. Queens take a mating flight, and the drones hang around and wait for a queen to fly by, and the drones actually die after they mate. The most drones are in the colony kind of mid-season, and then they sort of start dying off. Even though the drones a little longer, they're larger, and they live a little longer than the other bees. Than the worker bees. Worker bees are about 90% of the colony at peak season. They bring back nectar and they mix it with protein called bee bread, and they feed that to the baby bees. And the youngest bees are the bees that actually take care of the babies and it was interesting. One of the research presentations I went to, it was just on water foraging, and all bees have roles within the hive. And it's the oldest bees in the hive, those that are within 2 weeks of death, that have become the water foragers. They go out and they find a water source, they bring water back, and they continue to bring water back and feed it to the nurse bees who are feeding the young until they stop receiving the water. And at that point, they know that they can stop. I'm going to talk about how you provide water for your bees, but it's very important, particularly if you live in a community, because if you don't have a water source for them, they might find your neighbor's swimming pool, whatever. And the first bees were. Next, please. I mentioned the bees that are in a colony. Those are the 3 types of bees in approximate size, as you see right there. And there's the very first bees were raised in captivity by the Egyptians 4,500 years ago, and there was somebody found honey in the vessels that were thousands of years old, and the honey was still good. It's the only food that doesn't spoil.
Didn't they use honey to preserve some of the kings and
Yep.
people like that?
They used it for farming fluid at one
Yeah.
time, absolutely. But anyway, a little stats on the queen bee is that there's only one queen bee in a colony. She's the largest, and her primary role is to mate with the drones and lay eggs. 2 to 5 years, I mentioned. Worker bees are female bees. They do not reproduce. At their peak, there may be tens of thousands of worker bees in a colony. They perform various tasks. They clean the hive. They feed the young bees. They gather nectar and pollen. One of the things you'll notice if you start raising bees is you might be a little alarmed when you see dead bees all that in front of your hive, particularly in the wintertime, early wintertime. You'll see a lot of bees, dead bees. That's a good sign. That's a sign that they're doing their job, because all bees have roles, and some of the bees, their roles are to clean the hive itself, and also even to clean the frames. The drones, the worker bees, have a lifespan of only about 4 to 6 weeks during the foraging season, but they can live in a colony up to several months in the middle of a colony during wintertime when they're not working. They don't have to work. They live longer. So the queen bee will start laying eggs again around early January, about mid-January to late January, depending on the weather, but only a small amount of eggs, and then it increases over time. But the queen bee is crucial for success of the colony. One of the things I found fascinating was the whole concept, the whole science of pheromones. The queen bee gives off a pheromone that all of the bees know where she is at any time. And if she's out of the hive for more than 15 minutes, they all know, and they leave, and they will follow, and they will find her. And then they will swarm, and they will circle around her. I captured a swarm about a month ago, and when you have a swarm of bees like that in a tree, I had to get a ladder. I've got a picture of that. I'll show you. But I was very lucky. I got the queen, but they're very docile in that mode. You don't even need any. I put my bee half jacket on and valance and gloves, but you really don't need it. But I took an empty nuke box and just got the swarm. That's a standard procedure. Put it into hives. The colony's doing very well. She's now producing a lot.
Well, how happens if there are two queens that end up in the hive together?
Yeah, if there's 2 queens, one of them will either get killed or kicked out.
Who kills them?
The worker bees.
Oh.
So they have one that they prefer. And if you lose a queen, if there's no queen, if the queen dies, they will create a new queen. You can either buy a queen or wait, and they will begin producing a queen. The way they produce a queen is by feeding only royal jelly. It's a mixture called royal jelly, and it's called royal jelly because it's only for the queens. And so they will begin feeding. They first form queen cells, and in fact, there's a whole science on raising queens. The people that do that for a living, and it's pretty fascinating. And then you can buy. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Now, I'm looking at this. This might be a stupid question, but what's the difference between a honeybee colony and a bumblebee colony?
The difference between the colony, it has to do with the size of the colony, and a bumblebee colony is they often will find a place like in a tree, sometimes in the ground, and they'll create like a paper nest, but they tend to be much smaller, only a few hundred bees at the most. They're much larger. I'm sorry? They do produce honey, enough for themselves.
We need the boobies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have the trees.
That's right. That's right. Next, please.
We need the tree.
So that was what I was mentioning earlier about the queen bee. When she's gone, everything revolves around the queen. It's like a royal family, and she's so important to the colony. But if they do lose the queen, if the queen dies, if a beekeeper accidentally kills the queen, a commercial beekeeper will put another queen in right away, so they don't lose time. But it takes about 16 days to produce a new queen for the bees themselves before she's born, and then they all accept her. When you get a bee in a package instead of a nuke, the queen comes in a little cage, and the reason is that they're not associated with that particular queen. She wasn't born and raised with those bees, so they want to give those bees time. And the end of it has what they call candy corks, and they'll slowly eat through that as they begin. And when they decide they want to let her out, that they've accepted her, the bees will go through there and eat away the candy cork, and the queen will leave.
This is fascinating.
Yeah,
So this is all instinctual?
yeah, it's all instinctual to biology, exactly.
You could almost think of that it's,
Right.
they have a brain.
I know. So these are all the different parts of the bees. I won't really go into too much detail on this. You see on the back of their legs, see that gold part on the back of the legs? They have like baggy pants where they store their pollen, like shoplifters. And Linda calls them pollen pants because it's fun to watch them going into the hive with the orange on the back of their legs. They're coming in, and some of them, their job is to go out and find nectar. Some of them, their job is to go out and find pollen. Other ones are foraging water.
How do they transport nectar? Where is that in the baggy pants too?
No, they have two stomachs, and one of the stomachs is for nectar, and one of the stomachs is for their own survival. And there's certain bees that just, their job is just to go out and find nectar, and there's certain bees that just go out and find pollen. So and they'll be on the same plants. We have wild indigo. These are wild indigo seeds that Linda collected from some of our wild indigo trees. False indigo, I'm sorry, false indigo. False indigo is one of the very best trees for bees, for pollen and nectar. And we just got lucky because we planted about maybe 15 of these trees about 12 years ago. And now they're just blooming like
I
crazy.
haven't been to see those because mine are bushes.
I was gonna say, I had false.
Yeah, they're more like large bushes, ours are, but they're pretty large. I mean, and ours are 10 to 12 feet. Oh, ours are just loaded with bees, yeah. So she's,
Tiny little flowers.
yeah,
Yeah, and I thought the
Right,
flowers
right.
were, I thought I read the flowers were too little for most bees, but they
Yeah.
probably don't have honeybees.
Yeah.
We
Next
probably
week.
just have the native bees.
there's the, what you were asking for, and everything.
Yeah, she's funny as well.
So, that's kind of on the bees themselves. They contribute a lot to the health of our environment in many, many different ways. But there's about 20,000 different species of bees worldwide. In Maryland, there are 400 different species of native bees. And, you know, as you guys know, it's every time they plow, you know, for a mall or whatever, in a lot of, what's kind of fun, what's fascinating to me is some of these conferences to, you know, it gets me thinking, because some of the beekeeping organizations that present at these conferences have started working with their local state governments, and they are encouraging them on median strips and side strips and things like that, instead of growing flowers, instead of cutting grass and paying grass cutters, start growing wildflowers. They do this now in Europe, throughout Europe, a lot of England, and those wildflowers just proliferate.
There are a lot of communities in Maryland actually that have started doing that.
Yeah.
I've seen it, I live in, just outside of Denton, and 404 as you go through
Are they
Denton.
doing that?
Yep.
Oh, excellent. We went down to Horn Point Labs. I went and talked to the people at Horn Point because Linda was working there this morning, teaching at Horn Point. And, you know, what interests, I'm so happy when you go in there, they've got places for, with solar charging for electric vehicles and all that stuff. They have like 30 acres of grass, you know, as far as you can see in all directions. And the mowers are just going on.
Oh,
It just says to me, it's like, come on, guys.
I did a class there years ago, and we actually studied pollinators, because they have so many native
Yeah.
plants.
Oh, they do
and
have
things.
plants and trees and things like that. I just look at how much of it they're mowing. That's kind of ridiculous. Some of the crops that require pollination and that you eat every day are almonds, apples, blueberries, cherries, cucumbers, and watermelons. And it's funny, we just planted, we have a pretty large vegetable garden. Linda does most of the work in that. And
be the worker bee.
she's and we just this year, about a week and a half ago, I rototilled an area of the center field, and just for watermelons and pumpkins and things like that, because it's right by our hives. So I expect them to do pretty well.
So if considering that the Delmarva Peninsula is the farming is mostly soy and corn,
Right, it's for chickens.
and, yeah, rotating it back and forth and sending it to China or whatever they're doing,
Yeah.
then those don't need any pollination.
No, they do need pollination, and all that corn, the bees will get on that corn, they'll get on the tassels of the corn and pollinate it. They're pollinated through native bees.
I've noticed that the farmer right behind us, where I built a demonstration meadow
Yeah,
to prove that you could do it in an HOA. He, when he's planting and when he's plowing, he goes around, he gives it leeway.
oh, okay.
He widens the space around it, which is nice. You must see the value of that.
Right, I have a friend who grows a lot of corn, 1,600 acres of corn, in Cambridge, not Cambridge, Preston area. But he also has watermelons. And he often drops off a couple watermelons for us, but that tells me he's got a lot of native bees around there. He's growing, he's so successful with watermelons, you know. And it was one of the conferences I went to in Santiago, Chile. It was an international bee conference. There were beekeepers that had decided that had started capturing wild bees, native bees, and figuring out how to use them for pollination as well, because some of them are more effective for certain crops that they grow in South America. It was kind of interesting.
Well, some of them are very tiny.
Big sweat bees are very
Yeah.
small. There's a lot of them around. There's about 2.8 million honeybee colonies in the United States. There's recently an article in the paper. This right here shows you it's about 80% of flowering plants are pollinated by just honeybees, and more than 130 types of fruits and vegetables. That's about how many bee species in the United States, and about 20,000 worldwide. But the honeybee population has increased considerably, fortunately, in the last number of years. It's become more popular as a hobby. And you can kind of see that through the conferences and things like that that happen to people. And there's one thing I'm going to get into that's going to be a little bit of a downer for you. It's just a matter about how you manage it, about how you deal with pests. There are more now than there were in the 80s and 90s. Pests, varroa mites particularly, mites that will kill your colony if you don't treat them. Yeah, they're mites that grab onto the bees. I'll get into that in a minute, but there's a way that you just constantly, you have to treat them throughout the year in order to keep the mite levels down. But you will get mites in your nucleuses when you receive them. One of the nucleuses I got from a guy in Oxford was just loaded with mites this time. I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, next. Well, I talked about the waggle dance. This is one of the most amazing things to me is the bees themselves that are able to communicate within the hive. There will be about up to 5 different bees in a hive that are communicating to other bees. And you can watch them. What they do is there's scientists that have put cameras in these hives and they study them. And it all has to do with how they shape themselves, how they angle themselves. They communicate information about distance, the direction of the food source in relation to the sun, the duration of how far they need to fly, and they can tell the other bees about, through their communication, about how long it'll take to get to where they're going. And you'll watch bees come out of a hive, and after these bees have communicated to the other bees, they just come out like a line, and you'll see them all heading over towards a certain
So they're
direction.
doing the waggle inside the hive?
Inside the hive, they're shaking and they're moving in such a way they communicate GPS coordinates to the other bees inside the hive that tell them where
They were smart.
it's a form of sign language.
Imagine what we could learn from that.
Right, and it was just like, when you study, well, let's think about the pheromones, I was curious about how smoke,
Right.
why does smoke work so well with calming bees down? Is it smoke that calms them? No, what it does is it calms down their alert system that communicates. They have a communication system that they send out to other bees that tell them danger, and it suppresses that communication system so that they're not.
Like radio waves or something.
I'm sorry?
It's almost like they're using.
Yeah, it's almost like a radio wave,
or something.
but it's-
They're getting.
they also go in and they start munching on honey. That's one of the things they do when you smoke them, is they start eating honey because they're fearful a little bit of, of, it's just something they do for survival, it's a survival mechanism,
Oh, cool.
I thought maybe it had something to do with hiding in the sun, but I suppose, they come out on a gray rainy day, too,
Well, they know where the sun is over time of being in the hive in relation. And where you angle your hive, I'm gonna get into that in a minute too. It's so important where you place your hive exactly. But they know where the sun's coming up east to west, where it is in the middle of the day, that kind of thing. Once they've been in the hive for a couple of weeks. So I'll go ahead and go next, please. One of the things that anyone who wants to really get into beekeeping, the thing that helped me the most was starting out with a mentor, somebody that you could call and say, hey, what do I do here? What do you recommend? And my younger sister has chickens that she just raises for eggs, and she has a friend who was a beekeeper for quite a while, Val. And so I was calling Val on a regular basis. Then I met one guy he's the pharmacist at the hospital, Easton Hospital, who lives not too far from us. He's about a mile from us. We're just outside of St. Michael's. And, but he's very, very busy. But one winter I bought him dinner and we went down to Ava's in the evening and sat and I just picked his brain for a while, And that kind of thing kind of helps if you have someone. Oh, let me pass these cards around too. So if any of you want to call me, I am not a master beekeeper. I'm getting there. It's like I've got a heck of a lot to learn, but I can find answers for you. And if I don't know them, and I'm happy to help you out any way I can, as well as the trainer too. Yeah, thank you. But this is my honey, by the way. That's the name of our place. It's called Fox Cove. Where
Do you sell this?
Yeah, where can you buy it?
Yeah.
I'm not selling it yet.
I like the squeeze.
What I want to do is I'm expecting to have a lot of honey next year. This year I'm probably going to have about 90 gallons this year. But next year I expect I'll have a whole lot. So I kind of have an idea where I want to sell it, and I don't really want to go to farmers markets and stand there for 8 hours. So, I don't care. I just, if I can recoup a little bit of our costs,
My first
But,
one is Clayton's Market.
Yeah.
That is a good one for us.
So but I am pleased with the honey itself. And we haven't used any pesticides or anything like that. I'm trying to get our fields. It's gonna take about 2 more years for our fields to get to the point where they're hopefully, I don't have to worry about, they'll just be, I'll just oversee them a little bit every year.
What's the impact of where they're getting their nectar? And all that, so does that impact it?
It does, impacts the taste, impacts the color.
And your immune system.
It has, you'll see some very, very dark honey, but that's a good sign. It generally has more minerals in it. If it's a darker flavor. All of these conferences, I'm going to bring the EAS conference. Go back if you don't mind one first. They at the conferences, they encourage you to bring honey for the honey shows, and they have people who are professionals, tasters, and professionals at analyzing the honey. They're looking at it for moisture content and other factors. But the people that bring their honey to the shows, they want to be able to say, I took first place at the pie contest. So it makes it easier if you're selling your honey. But there's some books I'm going to show you. I'll have them to look at next week. But there's some books that I think are particularly helpful for any starting beekeepers to kind of be able to peruse, particularly over the winter time and all. There are a number of beekeeping clubs. I belong to the Wye River Beekeeping Association, which is kind of out of Centerville area. They meet at the Centerville Community College, Chesapeake Community College. And, I haven't been real active with them lately. I was going last year on a regular basis, but, there's some very, very smart people in that club. I'm not a club person. I'm kind of a loner, not really a social, you know.
It's like buying somebody dinner.
Yeah, that's right. I like bees, I don't like people. But I like cats and dogs. But but the thing with the clubs, when you get in a club, you know, they asked me to be the vice president last year of the library thing. And I told them, you know, I'm doing too much right now. I got too much going on. I appreciate it. And then I kind of feel bad because I felt bad because you need to contribute when you're in a club. And you need to you know, you have to participate. There's a lady in there who's very, very active. Her name is Lisa Gessie. And Lisa's a master beekeeper. She's the smartest person I know in this region in terms of beekeeping. And she's going to be presenting at the EAS conference this coming year. But she's a wonderful person. She's very, very active in the club. But what I was going to tell you is YouTube videos. If you just go onto YouTube and you type in beekeeping, there are a lot of really, really good YouTubes on beekeeping on YouTube. So you can type in beginning beekeeping, feeding bees, any subject that you feel a little uncomfortable with. There's a guy on there named Dave Burns who always presents at a lot of these conferences. I really like Dave. He's in Illinois. He's very knowledgeable. He's a full-time educator now and a full-time YouTube guy. That's all he does. But I learned from some of the people in England and other places. Some of them do things a little differently than we do here. It's funny, I met this guy at a conference from Middle England, and real nice guy when I was in Chile, and he said that his queens are so aggressive that he's gonna replace them all because he said he can't go out there without a full gear on, without smoking the heck out of it and all. He can't even get near his eyes. And it's funny, I talked to some other beekeepers about that, and the consensus is sort of, it may not be the queens, it might be other environmental factors that the bees are not happy. It might be too much traffic, it might be
That's what I was saying.
too much people, it might be other things that are upsetting the bees. There may be some smells coming from someplace.
Nervous and.
Exactly. It may not be, it's probably not the queens themselves. So that's something that you have to, before you go in and kill all the queens, you might want to look at that. But
Hey Jim, before you go on, I was writing down the YouTube guy. Is the last name Burns? Burns?
Yeah, B-U-R-N-S, Dave Burns. Real nice guy. He does a good job. And he puts out new videos almost every week on YouTube. The bees are the conferences. Let's get to the next place if you don't mind. I'm going to show you. This is how I started. It was I took a class from Penn State University online, and it's in their science curriculum. I looked up the price. It's $159. It's 10 modules. I would just go out in the wintertime and walk and do a module every time I did a walk for 10 miles through St. Michael's and the trail and everything, and then do a module on my phone. And you take a little test at the end of it. You can wait to get home if you want to take the test. But it's a nice introduction to beekeeping. It kind of covers all of the main fundamentals that you really need to give you a little more confidence before you get started. And then this was the last conference I went to, which was in outside of Pittsburgh. And it is true, there comes some strange people. They're people who are, into weird science, I guess, but they're very passionate about it. The ones, there are people who get into it for a little bit of time and they say it's too much effort. I just thought I could put out a couple hives and I have to worry about it. Or,
And then there are people who name the queens.
Yeah, that's right. Queen Latifah. Let's next, please. That's it. That one was just outside of I got these of them. That one was just outside of Pittsburgh that I went to in February of this year. This one was in Santiago, Chile. This is the biggest international conference, which was phenomenal. I loved it. Long flight, believe me, but it was.
They speak English?
Yeah, and the conferences all have, most of the presenters speak English, But if they don't, they give you a headset and it is an interpreter that's speaking to you, interpreting through the headset. So you just pick up a little, at a booth outside, whichever one of the things you want to go to, the presentations you want to go to. And then you can, at that point, you can listen to the whole thing in English. But fascinating.
Sorry,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
what does the name mean? How do you pronounce it?
I'm sorry?
How do you
The
pronounce
name of
it?
it?
Oh, Apiary.
And what does it mean?
Well, it's apiary, basically.
Okay.
So they have, it's beekeeping, I believe. I'm gonna have to look it up. I think it just means beekeeping. But I look at the derivative api, and I feel it's apiary, but it's probably beekeeping. I'll have to look it up. But the cool thing about that is just like every other conference is run, they run a beginner modules, then they have intermediate, and they have advanced. So you don't have to feel overwhelmed. They have ones that are just for beginning beekeepers. This one was cool to me just because, one of the things that was one of the presentations I went to was on environmental issues that are impacting bees, like global warming, and how it's changing beekeeping. And one of the maps was just mind-blowing they put up that showed wildfires in different parts of the world. We're aware of them in Canada because they affected us. We're aware of them out west. We're aware of them maybe in Australia. But they're happening throughout Europe, throughout Asia. It was like, and they had a map to show where all these kind of spontaneous wildfires are taking place and burning a lot of timber, what's that? I'm sorry.
It says Apimondia is a compound word that translates to mean International Federation of Beekeepers.
Oh, okay, they made the word, it's not an actual Spanish word. Okay, next please. And then, so they do this conference every other year in the Northern Hemisphere, in North America, or South America. But then they do it elsewhere in the world every other year. So the next one is going to be next year in Denmark.
So North Equator, South Equator.
I guess that's what it is, to give everyone that's a beekeeper in different parts of the world an opportunity to go. I had a project in Denmark for 3 weeks, and it's a fabulous place to visit if you ever get a chance. I worked on an island that was also outside of Denmark. Intelligence operations partnerships, but it's just a lovely country in terms of the people. People ride bicycles. Almost everybody rides a bicycle to work. They generally have one car for a family that all share between multiple generations. They tax the cars about 100%. So if you can buy a car for $30,000, it's going to cost you $60,000. That's one of the reasons they're trying to discourage cars. But then they make it easy, public transportation, to get around anywhere. So most people, they're very fit and they ride their bikes a lot. Next, please. So this was one of the beekeepers in Santiago, Chile, that in the Andes Mountains. This guy was so fascinating. I love going to the apiaries. I find that that's one of the places that I get a chance to talk to other beekeepers more than you do when you're sitting at a conference and a presentation.
Right.
I get a chance on a bus, sometimes be an hour ride, to the place. Next, please. So this guy with the light with the gray hair in front of us with a beard, he's about 75 years old, and he lives by himself, and he manages 3,000 bee colonies by himself. And
There's a reason why he's by himself.
yeah. And what he's demonstrating right there is when I was talking about the mite treatments, he couldn't afford to buy Formic Pro or Apigard or some of the mite treatments that we buy for small numbers of colonies. So he buys 50-gallon jugs of formic acid and he mixes it with glycerin, and that's what he was demonstrating here. And then he was showing here where you had these, the pads that come in the bottom of meat when you buy it in a grocery store. Well, he buys those pads, which only cost a few cents by the thousands, and then he takes plastic cups, puts a mix of formic acid and glycerin, so it kind of cuts it down, so it's not too strong, puts it upside down on a pad, and so it slowly releases it into the hive over time, and then it takes weeks before it's finally dissipated all the way. But it continues to kill. Formic acid is one of the only, I think there's one or two more, but it's one of the only treatments that kills mites inside the brood chamber, before the mites, there are mites that get inside on the bees before they're even born.
And it doesn't affect the bees at all.
No,
It obviously
no, it's a
doesn't
natural,
affect the bees.
it's actually a natural in the environment, it's not toxic. So they found that it doesn't really have any effect on the bees. And it's one you can use with honey supers on. You can use it while you're making honey. I used it before I put my honey supers on, but next please. I walked into this, I was just walking around his property and I walked into this and I asked him, that's all honey, those are 50-gallon drums, 50, so not more than 50 gallons, I guess. Yeah, 50 or 60-gallon drums of honey. And I asked him about those and I said, why are those all stacked up in there? He said, well, honey is just like oil on the world market in that it never goes bad, but the prices go up and down. So he says, I wait for the price to get to a certain level and then I call the truck and they haul it all to the ships and they send it to where it's gonna
What
go.
about stacks and bonds? You can have.
It can make a big, it's a difference of,
You built a big garage, you'll know what you're doing.
next one, please. So this is a homemade solar melting, system. So you can build or buy solar melters. You can buy a solar melter yourself, or you can just build one with glass and a thing like this. And what happens is when you process honey, you have wax cappings left over, and from uncapping the frames, and you have it in an uncapping tank, which I'll show you next week if you come to our place. But I just have a small tank, but he has these giant tanks. So you have all this wax. So the wax, for him, that's a product that he can sell in blocks. So there are processes to go through to turn that wax into pure products, which I use wax on my frames because the honey, the bees that create honey do it faster if you add an extra coat of wax to the honey super frames. But a lot of people you'll see at these conferences, they're selling other wax products, candles, and I might make wax lips or something. They have wax Coke bottles, remember?
Yeah, those are fun.
But I thought that was pretty interesting. Is that he just goes the slow method because he doesn't care. It's just slow melt method. It gets very hot inside there, and then it eventually melts down, and then he filters it. Go ahead, next thing. There's some of the wax right there in the front, the blocks of wax.
So what do you do with the wax?
Well, he sells it to people who create things from wax. Wax is used in a lot of different processes in the industrial process. It's used in auto manufacturing. It's used in people use the wax for products like waxing tables or this. I mean, if you look it up, there's so many different uses for wax. So people who make products from wax will buy that from him as well. Next, please. This was a different apiary up in Chile. This was only about an hour and a half from Patagonia. And it was interesting. There was a couple from Oregon that were on the bus sitting next to me. And they were kind of like old hippies, They were neat people. They were they were in their mid-70s. And I asked them, they had what's called top bar hives. Most people these are called Langstroth hives. All the bee hives you've seen so far are Langstroth hives, which are the traditional hives that have been around since about the middle 1800s. But for hundreds of years before that, people used top bar hives. And a lot of older beekeepers actually they like top bar hives because there's not a lot of lifting, What time? Oh, here it is right here. So,
You're good.
I get to 2:30, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right, so this was a cool operation here. They had far fewer hives than that gentleman at the other one in Chile, and it was kind of a family operation, but it was kind of cute because they had like a little shed with windows that they had designed, and one of the daughters got in there and she was selling, I bought Linda a pair of bee earrings. They're selling for $5, custom made. Little, beautiful, weren't they? They're $5, you know, and for all the people that go through their little tour, they're selling their honey, they're selling their products. They really felt like they should buy something from them, you know. It was kind of like, it felt good, you know, and I'm fascinated to see how other people in the world live. And that to me was so cool. I mean, to see, you know, their home and see how they, you know, how do they survive? How do other people in other parts of the planet survive? It's such a beautiful part of the world, I will tell you. I don't know, you probably know this, but, you know, I mean, Chile's one of the few countries that lost their democracy during the Pinochet revolution years ago. But now they are a democracy just like ours. They're a representative democracy just like the United States. So it's a very peaceful, safe, pretty nice place. I can't say enough about the people, how pleasant they are, and it's just a really beautiful country, nice place. So this is the conference, which is, if you really want to get into beekeeping, if you want to do something, this is the first time in 20 years that this conference has come back to Maryland. It's called the EAS Conference, Eastern Agricultural. And this was the one I attended in Massachusetts. It was the most knowledge I've ever gained at one time. If you can pass these around. This is the conference schedule. Let me get one of these. Open that. This is the conference schedule. Dodie, I'll get one of these to you, or I can email it to you, or I can give it to you next week.
If you email it to
Katrina? Okay, will do. But this shows you, the conference this year is at Turf Valley Country Club, outside of Ellicott City. It's just off Route 70. And it's a resort. I just signed up for it last night, and I'm doing one of the apiary tours on Thursday. That's off-site. And then they have like tours, which all of them, they have a tour of Baltimore, and you can go see Francis Scott Key. Not the bridge. That's right. You go up and see, you know, different sites. But but I'm interested in going to wherever the apiary is. I think, and then they have one tour that goes to a winery in Carroll County, I think, for people. But I'm gonna try to do the whole conference because I found it just so. Lisa's presenting, by the way, and one of those in the advanced. Lisa Gezzi, she's one of the presenters. But this is if you want to increase your knowledge of beekeeping. This is the way to do it. This was the most educational time I've ever spent. Is this EAS conference? I'm going to try to do every one. I'm just so grateful that it's close by this year. Next.
Sorry,
Oh, no, it's all right.
getting distracted by.
All right, there's the dates. It shows you the dates if you want, if you're thinking about it. 3 days, if you do 3 days, the majority of the education is the first 3 days. I signed up for all 5 days, but it's $250 for the first 3 days. And you can really develop a lot of knowledge. And then everyone there, just about all the presenters are master beekeepers, most of them are PhDs, and a lot of research scientists, and they love telling you anything you need to know. I developed some nice friends there. This is where we were, when I was at the EAS conference, I went to an apiary in Western Massachusetts, and this was one of the products they're making from honeycomb that sell, and the honeycomb products actually are more profitable than honey. So that's one reason they package that for different, for distribution. And it was a Mennonite family. They have 3,000 colonies. They have their workers are from Nicaragua. Next, please. And the majority of their hives they send out around the country, just like the other one I was telling you about. This was you can see look at all the colonies on that truck. You can imagine if that truck had an accident on the highway, what would happen. But they're the workers are here from Nicaragua, and the family told us that they are going to increase to about 5,000 colonies only because the family wants to bring up some more family members and friends to work there, and they love doing the work. And you'll find that it's almost just like other types of farm work. It's migrant workers that tend to do the work in the fields.
The wines.
Winery, exactly. But anything that's tedious and hot and hard, you know. And then the people, next one, please. The people the family themselves do a lot of the end products. That's their little girl.
What do they use that for?
That's actually, you can eat that honeycomb. That's,
Okay.
you know, the way
They sell it.
they produce it and then they sell it, yeah. And the way you put your frames in the hive in such a way so that they're thicker, fewer frames in the hive, so they produce a comb like that. Next, please.
I could see a high-end chef doing something with that. With the honeycomb.
That little guy's about 5 years old. He was interested in showing off for us how he worked this machine by himself. It was mind-blowing to watch this little guy work. And he was taking everything out, stacking it up. This machine extracts honey and it flips around. You see the metal to the left of us? That's a big drum. And so it takes all those frames and it flips them around in a circle really fast, just like an extractor does. I'll show you what my extractor looks like in another picture.
So it's like using centrifugal force?
Yes, centrifugal force, exactly, and faster. And it's designed for big commercial operations. That's one of the things that's fascinating to me from these conferences. You get to see how this is done on a larger and larger scale, rather than a small scale. So most of the people are small scale, like me, but we talked a little bit about flora, fauna, about flowers and wildflowers and things like that. This is England on the left side in the United States, I think it is on the right side. Yeah, they're driving on the right side of the road. And then it's what most of the more and more states are starting to try to get to instead of, but what I wanted to mention about this, and we'll go into this a little bit at the property, how our plan is, how we're kind of mapping things out. But I go to, it's called John S. Ayton Nursery, which is in Preston. They're online, and you can specifically order pollinator plants. They have categorized by pollinators. So this year, every year, I try to order some of these trees and bushes and things. That's where I got those wild indigo trees. They were just like sticks, and now they're huge. But this year, we ordered 25 redbud trees and 25 beautyberry trees. The deer love munching on those beautyberries.
Yeah,
They wiped out most of them.
and don't you have to be careful where you plant them so that you're not creating shade?
Yeah, and I'm gonna get into that in a minute too. That's a very important part, because Linda has this thing about never cutting down trees or eliminating trees or whatever. And I'm trying to explain to her, all the beekeepers that I know of, unless you live in Florida or Texas or Arizona, the more sun, the better. In those places, you want to have some shade, or if you can, you kind of want the trees and the shade. But the bees produce more honey, and sooner, earlier, the warmer that hive stays throughout the day. So you really don't want to put it in a shaded place. But I find that interesting because we lived in northern England when it was hardly ever any sun. And some of these beekeepers that I met were from England and Northern Ireland. And it was like, so the bees are adaptive. And that was one of the things I learned, is that they adapt to whatever. Everybody goes, oh, you got to do it this way, do it that way.
I was thinking more in terms of growing pollinators. Flowers, they need sun, usually full.
Right. Oh, yeah, exactly.
You wouldn't want to
That's right.
stage your trees in a way that
Right.
they'll get.
So
So these are the two different ways you can order your bees. I get mine from a guy named B. George, who's in Oxford. You can find him online. His name is George Meyer. And the new comes in a package like that one on the left that has 5 frames. That tends to be the most common and most popular type of way to start a colony. The packages on the right generally come with about 3,000 bees, and I was mentioning to you, they're all loose, and 10,000 bees, 3 pounds. They're not the same amount of bees, but they're loose, and my understanding is more of them die before you get them into the colony. you open up, you put the queen cage inside your hive, and you open up the front, and then the bees through the pheromones will find their ways and start populating the frames. When you get a nuke like the one on the left, you take those 5 frames and you take them out of that box the exact same way that they're sitting in there, and you put them in the center, and then you put 5 frames on, total on either side of them to populate. So now what you've got is, it's called a bottom deep. Next, please. And that's what a package looks like when you get it with just the 10,000 loose bees that you order, it generally comes in the mail. Or you can go pick it up. Your chances of survival and having more survival is much better if you go pick it up from a beekeeper. Most beekeepers in Maryland only sell nukes, but there are 1 or 2, I think, in Western Maryland sell packages. Next, please. And then just that top part is what I was telling you, that's where the queen cage is underneath that. Let me take it out. Next, please. So, this is actually a picture of one of my nukes and one of my deep boxes, and it has. I'm sorry, what were you gonna say?
Well, so the nuke comes with an established queen inside?
Yes, and they've already accepted the nuke. And there's the name of the guy if you want to order nukes. Now, what you want to do is you want to order them in. I ordered mine on January the 1st. He does a deal that's first in, first out. And even though January 1st is a holiday for most people, he will accept your order on January 1st. But he does it based on whoever orders their bees first gets them first. And I found it's a little better to get them a little early, to try to get them early. It helps your colony get established a little faster. And the other thing I want to mention is if you're starting beekeeping, they always advise that you start with about 2 colonies. Don't start with 1.
That was something I was going to ask you.
Yeah, you're always better off starting with 2 because you'll be very disappointed if you lose both of them.
Right.
And you might get discouraged, and it's not uncommon. Next, please.
Did you make your own boxes? They don't seem like they're.
I thought this was mine because it looks just like mine, but it's not. I looked at the hive. I thought it was mine, but it's not.
But are they easy to make? It doesn't.
Yeah, no. I'll show you where you can buy them.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So you take go
back.
can you take the things out of on the
All you
right
do,
side and
just
put them over?
just set them exactly like they are right there. Right in
It
that.
was purchased looks like a cardboard box.
It is. It's a
Okay.
cardboard box. It's wax on the outside.
And then they just spread out among.
Yeah, he was
all
happy
the
because
frames.
I brought his cardboard boxes back to him this year, but most people.
Okay.
But he's a real nice guy. But you take those and just put them in the same, you put them in the slots. That one's showing 7. Is it showing? It's showing 5. Okay, yeah. Then put them in the other 5
Is it
slots.
hard to pick them up out of there?
No, they're very easy. They're pretty light, and the bees are, like you said, as long it's one place you really want to wear your protective gear because the bees are in a new environment. They're a little frightened.
So that, in taking out that on the right and putting it into the left, that, the thing on the right, that's what is called the new.
That's called the nuke. That's what the guy is growing over on his property is creating. And he's waiting until there's so many bees in there and they're doing so well. And then he's ready to sell them. So the next person, he's got people lined up and he does it based on how they've progressed, over time.
So it looks like these frames are hanging, this is like a hanging file folder.
Yeah, it's like hanging
They're
file
hanging on the
folders.
side.
Yeah, the
Okay.
frame is a piece of plastic and these deep boxes, this is what they call a brood box or a deep box. The brood box is where the queen produces most of the eggs. And in Maryland, most people run 2 brood boxes, upper and lower. Lisa Gezzi, I was mentioning, she runs a medium, a large and a medium. Part of that I think has to do with the weight and things like that and not having to, move stuff around. But I'm going with 2 deep boxes like most people do. If you are from, I want to say, above North Carolina all the way up, most people run 2 boxes. But down in Florida and Texas, a lot of people just run 1 box because the bees don't need as much honey to get through the winter because the winters are much shorter. So the bees have a much shorter period of time. So and there's ways that you'll see on some of these YouTube videos where you can manipulate the frames before the winter where you might want to put the honey frames the bees make the honey on the outside frames. They tend to fill up the outside frames with honey for their own, use. Well, you'll have two brood boxes with a lot of honey frames, so it's kind of good to put some of that honey right above them because they tend to go up this way from the middle. They cluster in the middle during the winter time. So instead of having the honey out here for them to get to, it's better to have it kind of like right above them. I've learned a lot.
Cover the boxes in the winter?
Yeah, I cover them with, and I'll show you, I got a picture of that. I buy, insulation, go ahead. So there's B. George's nukes, that I got from him, picked up. That's his house in the background. And, he sells honey at the, farmer's market in Easton on Saturdays usually throughout the summer. I don't really want to do that, but
Maybe he'll sell your honey for you.
yeah. Next please. So one of the things when you make a hive stand, I'll show you mine. There's different ways you can do it. You can buy a hive stand like the one on the right, and then you can put like a place to hang the frames as you take them out of the hive. Well, I talked to some different master beekeepers about this, and because I showed them how I made I showed them how I made my first ones, and they said that's actually the best way. I was glad I didn't have to change because they said it's more like the one you see on the left, but it doesn't have concrete that's in the ground. It has cinder blocks. And what you want is you want that hive frame to be level across the vertical, but you want the beehive itself to be a little bit of a tilt, 10 to 15 degrees, just a slight amount. So the rain runs off, particularly in the wintertime. You don't want cold water running into that hive in a very torrential rain. You want a tiny bit of a tilt on the top of it. This one doesn't show a roof, but I'll show you the different parts as we go. Go next, please. So when you find a location for it, you definitely want to have, your beehives should be facing southeast, and they could be facing a little more south than east, or a little bit more east than south, but you don't want them facing northwest or north or west. And the reason is that in the summertime, they get really hot in the evening. In the front of those bees, you will see them trying to cool themselves off. So they will be in the shade in the front. In the late in the evening, when they come back from foraging and they're really tired, you don't want them to be where the sun is hitting the front of that hive real hard. That's not a good thing. You don't want it. You don't want to have a lot of. You want to have some break if you can. I'm trying to design our hive architecture so that it is surrounded by trees, not the ones that will take. If I have to, I'm gonna top them off so that they don't take away shade. But so they provide more of a wind block on all sides. Last year I used hay bales, and I've used, and some people use pallets. They'll just set up a few pallets, like this that you can get for free and string them together around behind your hives. They work just fine. And because just blocking a heavy wind to them will keep that temperature up, so they don't have to work as hard. Next, please. Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to ask about the water source around here. You probably don't have to worry about a water source that much, right?
Well, you do, because they won't drink. Well, you do, and I'll tell you why. We live on Spencer Creek, but the bees won't drink salt water, and even if it's brackish water like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you gotta have. You don't want them drinking brackish water, and they won't drink it the first time they try it. They won't.
Plus, you need to have something so that they don't drown.
Exactly. I'll show you how I do mine, and I think it's really successful. I've been very happy with how I provide my water, and it's pretty easy. I'll show you. I took a picture of it. This is when I talked about when you put up your hive stand, how you have to be concerned about. See where I say when I put a picture on the ground surface right there? All right, so here, this may be a little controversial for people because I had to justify it in my mind because we don't like to do pervious, or impervious surfaces. We like to do, something where it drains. But I've learned from my bee club, and I learned from many other beekeepers that if you don't put something on the bottom, like I'm using a roofing paper underneath it now and shingles, two problems you're gonna have. You're gonna have all that grass growing up underneath your hive, which is gonna cut down the airflow. Because in the summertime, there's a slide you wanna use, if you use, and I'm gonna recommend, you can use a bottom board that's solid, or you can use a bottom board that has a slide that comes out, that leaves a screen at the bottom and allows better airflow. So you wanna close that bottom board in the wintertime. The beekeepers I've talked to said they've had more success with the bottom closed in the wintertime. You remember heat rises, so it's not such a big deal. Some of them leave them open all winter long. But the people I've kind of listened to said and Lisa Gezzi, she closes hers in the winter and she opens them up in the
Do you have a
spring.
picture of that?
Yeah, I think
So
so.
then there's some nice airflow.
Okay, next please. The other thing you want to do is make sure the top doesn't blow off or your bees are going to be gone. Because if the queen leaves, top blows off, the queen leaves. So I use bricks and blocks and things like that. I'll go back one more, Trina, if you would. The other thing, remember I mentioned about the direction? See how the middle has support in the middle? Now, I don't use two hives. My bee stands are this long, but they only have one hive. And I asked a master beekeeper at a conference early on, and he said, if you can go with just one hive on a situation like that, you're better off. Because what happens is bees drift from one to the other, and sometimes they'll smell the honey in the other one, and you'll have one of the bees' jobs are guard bees in the front of the hive. So you have an entrance reducer, and that entrance reducer is so important. The position you put it in, it's not critically important, but you want to, when your bees are not that, colony's not that large, you restrict them entrance a little bit more so the guard bees can protect the other bees. You'll see commercial beekeepers have a lot of hives kind of close to each other because they have so many hives. But they said if you have space to be able to space them out, you're better off in terms of not having as much robbing, because robbing is a problem. And the other problem you have is I was talking about with pests. Some of the pests are, and we'll get into that, are wasps. Wasps will attack. I had a friend of mine, I met at one of these conferences in New York. She lost all her hives to wasps and I almost did, because I did something that Dave Burns was showed, and that's why you can't just like take everything somebody does. He was shown open feeding. So I put all this syrup out, and all the bees were like before the winter. I said, I'll fatten them up before the winter. And they were all, well, what it did was it drew white wasps from everywhere else. Then I was fighting wasps. And they almost killed my colonies, and I was out in the evening whacking wasps, They were trying to get in my hives.
How
Go
about
ahead.
hornets?
Huh?
How about hornets?
Hornets and wasps. European hornets are not as bad.
They show
I
up
have
in
them
my house a
too,
lot.
but they're just like one, and they'll take one bee. But they're real big and dumb and fly slowly, I hate to kill them, but Linda said, you gotta protect your hives.
Yep.
Okay, next please. These are the bee, I get them from all these places. I get my supplies. I get my hives from the Middle Man Lake. Is where I get all my beehives. They're the largest of all of them. Better Bee and Dayton are both very large as well. Galena Farms up on the right, you can buy your hives already painted or not painted. I recommend you buy them painted. It's only a few dollars more instead of painting yourself. But if you paint them, you need to use what's called a low VOC paint, a no VOC paint. You can buy it at Bees. Remember I said how their sense of smell is so good? VOC it means, and I don't know exactly what it stands for, we'll have to look it up, but it's the smell, it's an odor it gives off that the bees find offensive. So you can buy no VOC paint. I was using like what's called milk paint. But then I found another kind of paint I bought a 5-gallon that I use to paint all my hives with now. So I use white hives and then I just repaint them and touch them up, right? But you can buy from Galena Farms and other places, you can buy beehives that are made out of cedar that are coated in beeswax. That's also a good solution. They look nice too. Next, please. So there's a beehive. That's what it looks like when there's all the different parts to it. The bottom is basically a stand, but you can put that bottom board right on those 2x4s I mentioned. Those 4x4s that I showed you, or you can put it on a stand like this. I have it both ways. The stand's kind of nice because it gives them in the summertime when it's real hot, You'll see them bearding on that stand out front, gives a place to cool off. The bees will stay outside the hive and will scare you when you see like a whole lot of bees outside your hive in the middle of summertime. And you think they're gonna swarm, and really what they're doing is they're cooling off. They're regulating the temperature in that hive, and they just continue to go in there a few at a time to keep the temperature at the same time. The entrance reducer at the bottom, you also, in early spring and in the late fall, you use a mouse guard if you're anywhere near fields or any place in a rural area, because mice will go in there and they'll eat the heck out of your chomp the heck out of your honey. Next, please. Oh, also, I want to mention, you can also get these as either A-frames, and a lot of beekeepers, when they're older or, if you're smaller and you don't want to lift a lot of weight, you can buy 8-frame beehives, and they work great. I met a guy that Barbara introduced me to, and he said he's going to all 8-frame hives. I may end up doing that one day, I don't know, but right now, I think I'm good with the 10s. Okay, next, please.
You're tall.
Bee space is one of the things with Langstroth, that's called a Langstroth hive. And this is a very important concept, because if bees if you give them too much space, then they create comb. And they always they have another product called propolis, where they seal up all of the little gaps between the hives themselves, which is kind of cool. And they create it's almost like a caulk that they put around. It's a clear caulk that they propolize, but they will put that they'll propolize and glue anything together if they have too much space. So when you space out your frames, you want to keep an equal amount of gap between each one of the frames. It's very important. And same thing inside the hive. You don't want to have too much space between boxes and things like that. Next, please. That's what Langstroth back in the middle 1850s came up with, this concept of bee space that seemed to be the perfect, space for bees to create honey. To multiply and do their jobs. Next, please.
Is that stuff on top, the propolis?
Yeah, you see the stuff on top, that's what that is. And you got 10 minutes. Okay, next, please.
Okay.
So there's an example of a beekeeper that forgot to put his frames in, and they are such an incredible how they created that honeycomb so that it's perfect with ventilation and everything else. They're just amazing creatures. Next, please. So that's the Langstroth hive on the right. See the top box, how it's smaller? So see on the right, it says queen excluder. So the first year, you should not take any honey. You should let the bees have all the honey the first year. The second year, in the spring, or not the very early spring, but let's say into around, I put my honey supers on around April 30th this year. And you put a queen excluder, and so that the only thing you're going to get in the top box, you're not going to get any baby bees, you're only going to get honey. So then you use the honey. They've already completed one of my honey supers, so I added another one on top. Now I've had guys, and one guy in the bee club said, well, once they finish, I put that on top and put the next one underneath it. But maybe that's a good way to do it. I don't know. I'm going with the convention right now, and maybe one day I'll change the way he says to do it, because everything I've read and studied says the bees move up in the hive as they go, and the bees that are in that first honey super will move into the second honey super, and the other new bees that are ready to move from bottom up will start in that new honey super. But what you have is a screen bottom board you see on the bottom. That's what I recommend. Is not in this area, because it gets pretty hot in the summertime. If the people that live in Illinois and Ohio and Michigan, a lot of them will have just a solid bottom board without a way to ventilate the bottom. The bees do fine because they have less hotter months. But we have a lot of months into the 90s. A lot of time frame into the 90s. It's rough on bees. Next, please. So this is what I talked about. Two other manufacturers. The one on the right, I don't know anything about it, but I see it at a lot of shows. And if you're getting into beekeeping, it might be something to look into, or the Hive IQ ones. The one on the left is Apiary. And I was telling Trina before some of you guys get in there, I own some Apiary hives, but I'm not using them yet because I found they're not conventional size frames. you gotta use their frames. And my new guy would not take my frames because he moves them between, it's complicated. I'm gonna use them eventually, and I know how I'm gonna use them. I'm gonna use them for my splits, but for now, I'm not using them. But the one on the right, I'm pretty sure just uses standard frames, and it is insulated, and there's some real advantages to that. So that's kind of the way I started with just wooden hives, because that's what everybody's always done, and it seemed to me to make sense. But like that one on the right has fairly new invention. Next, please. There's the 8-frame hive, and that's what an unpainted box, when you get it, what it looks like. Again, like I said, I recommend right by it. That's the top bar hive, which, some people use because you don't have to do a lot of bending and things like that. Next, please. You can read about those. Next, please. Entrance reducer, very, very important. Dave Burns talks a lot about entrance reducers, and he has a method that I've employed where you take it out on the right side a little bit so that you see the small opening on the top? The small opening is what you use in the wintertime. You can have that so that there's a little piece of wood on the bottom or the piece of wood's on the top. Lisa Gezzi, I went with her method of using a small opening because there's a lot of dead bees in the wintertime, and by having that little piece on the bottom allows them to climb over the dead bees to get out. But I don't think it really makes that big of a difference. Most of the time you have it, see that bottom opening right there? That's what you have it on most of the time. Some beekeepers, particularly commercial beekeepers, leave the entire front open during what's called the honey flow, which is like mid-May, later May through, depending on what region you're in here, later May through later July, or I guess mid-August. They leave that completely open, but it's recommended for non-commercial beekeepers not to do that, and you can pull that out a little bit so they also have an opening on the right side, so they have that opening. Plus, if you have a hive with a lot of bees in it. Next, please.
And then in the winter, couldn't you just put like a chunk of wood in there to make a smaller opening?
Yeah. Next, please. And then I talked about the no zero VOC paints. You can get them at Lowe's, you can get them at everything, but it's very important if you're doing your own paint. You're gonna have to paint some things when you get them. Next, please. These are the tools. Any of the stuff I don't get to today, I'm gonna go over at our property. I'm gonna show you all the tools, all these tools, I'm gonna go over them. Next, please. These are different types of clothing. I have all of this. The one in the middle is what I found the most useful. The reason I have those 3 areas is that those are where the bees are gonna sting you the most: in your face, your hands, and then third on your feet. So you can have all of if they're mad, then you can have your suit on and I'll go out there with a pair of Crocs on and they'll get inside there. But I don't get stung very often, but my biggest fear is developing a bee allergy. I don't want to it's good to get, what I'm told, I don't know if it's true or not, but from old beekeepers been around a long time, they say if you get stung a little bit on a regular basis, the chances of getting an allergy is not very big. But if you get stung a lot at one time and then don't get stung for 6 months, you could develop an allergy. So I don't mind once in a while. It's a very small prick. It doesn't feel bad. Next, please. These are some of the tools, the smokers. That bee brush in the middle will save you a lot of bees deaths because you're brushing them off. You never kill them. It's like they just go, okay, wherever you brush them, when you put the hive back on, when you take you take one of the root boxes off and you put it back on, the bees like getting on the little wood around it, so you gotta kind of brush them. I squished a lot of bees early on. Now I brush them and then I slide it this way and they move as you know what I mean? I kind of push it in that way. Next, please.
Is that on the far
The bottom,
right?
the next-
Is that for cutting?
Yeah, the right is what you need, because remember I told you how they seal up the boxes? So they're sealed like with glue, and it kind of unglues them when you pop that.
Okay.
And that little hook is really, really helpful for pulling that entrance reducer out, so that you can change it, change the entrance reducer.
Cool.
The smoker itself, I'm gonna show you next week how to light the smoker and the types of smoker fuel. I use mostly pine needles. You can go into any woods, find pine trees, gather up, put them into a bucket or into a closed container, bucket with a lid or Tupperware, what do you call it? Like
plastic bin, something, oh, like a 5 gallon.
Not a gift, you know, the thing that you get from,
Okay.
a bin, yeah, just a plastic bin with a lid on. I store them in 2 locations where I have my knives, the needles, and then use a little piece of cardboard or a little piece of paper to start it with. And then you wanna pump it. Go next. This is where my tools are. I had this in the back of a truck from the early 90s, and then it was funny, I had this on the side of my garage for years and years, and I was like, wait a minute, I can use that. And it's all waterproof and all. Go ahead, next one, please. So that's where I keep most of my tools and my gear and stuff like that. There's my smokers, you can see, and I keep my clothes in there, my bail, everything. So it works out really well. Next, please. I just got that table from Facebook Marketplace. And it's good to have a table or something like that to work with. The field between those 2 is wildflowers, and then the field over to the right is wildflowers, and behind it. But you can see on the table, there's a smoker, there's, that box is how I feed my bees syrup. The box on the the lower left corner of the table. See how it's got two air sections to it? And those parts in the middle float up. That's a feeder, and in front of it is a bucket feeder. So you can put that upside down on the inner cover and feed them. But I really love this because I might have to put syrup in there once in a while, because it holds 2 gallons. And the bees come up through that middle part. Okay, that's about it.
So Jody, we might lose you because the system
Yeah.
just said we have a
We're almost
minute.
at the end, but we'll cover the rest of this next
Yeah,
week.
it's gonna start my dry run meeting, but I can probably, because I got someone coming at 2:45.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Just go through it real quick. Let me just, there's mixing syrup. I'll go through, I'll just remember which of the things I have to do. In the spring, you mix, that's my syrup mixing operation right there, because of, it just, a crab cooker makes it easier, faster. There's my water. The bees love the corks, wine corks. If you like wine, there's your answer. You can buy those from Amazon, 250 for
Do
20
they
bucks.
clean to the side? And
Then they stand on top and they just roll around, and then they stick their tongue, they have very long tongues. They stick it usually between the corks.
Yeah.
They love those corks.